Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome back. If you're a long-time listener, welcome back. If you are new to the channel, hello and welcome, and come on in, and we're happy to have you here. So it's been a minute since I've recorded a new podcast, and let me tell you, I'm excited to be back. And I wanted to hop on here and do an episode for Father's Day for sure. I could not forget about my folks that are dealing with father wounds, Father's Day trauma, that kind of good stuff. And so I want to talk a little bit about, the narcissistic father wound. Which I think that there's a lot of people that deal with a narcissistic father wound. So let me run down some examples of, people that might struggle, with some narcissistic father wounds. So if you had an overbearing, controlling father that just ran his household with an iron fist, children were believed to be, the thought was that children are to be seen and not heard. Children are not free thinkers, should not have their own individual and autonomous identity. You might be struggling with a narcissistic father wound, so you probably are if you dealt with a father that was super controlling, a father that is emotionally and or physically available that wasn't, due to necessarily sickness or death, but maybe a father that was kind of in and out, showed up sporadically throughout your childhood, or a father that just kind of left and never came back, or that you never knew. There's a possibility of narcissism there. Even if you didn't know your father, it does not negate the possibility that, if the family tried to get him to come back, if the family tried to get him to be involved and they chose not to do that, that still doesn't negate, that absentee or emotionally father that's physically present, but is emotionally unavailable, meaning that again, they're not inquisitive about their children. They're not inquisitive about the lives that their children lead, the identities of their children, who their children are. They're not available when their children are going through things. They're not available during the important times. So, for example, showing up the parents at school day. They're not there for, like, just when you need someone to talk to comfort you and things like that. And that's more of a consistent theme, not a once and done type theme. So consistently being emotionally unavailable, and not even being interested in the idea of being emotionally available to their child as well. So if you were to talk to them or try to attempt to talk to them about the problem, around their emotional unavailability, they're very dismissive. They're very cold towards that, or they don't care, or they become very defensive, and they turn it around on you and make it your responsibility, to try to make them more emotionally available. So I think that that's one. I think, if you have a father that rejects you, and so no matter who you are, no matter what you've accomplished, no matter, just how your life turns out, you never measure up. Nothing that you ever do is ever good enough. They're always condescending towards you. They're always talking down to you. They're always comparing you to maybe other children in their family who they perceive to be doing well, or they want you to try and be more like them. And so there's that constant rejection. You'll never be worthy of their love or acceptance in their eyes. If you have a father that is choosing to show up in another family, so, a father that chooses not to be available for you physically or emotionally or in any way available for you, their child, but they choose to maybe leave your mother and go start a family with someone else, or take on other children under their wing as theirs. There is I don't like to name names or anything like that, but I think that there's a good example of a gentleman who's been making headlines in the news recently, and even back in the day, who is specifically a black male superstar, and is married into another race, and is refusing to claim his children, or has also been known to openly sort of talk about his children condescendingly in front of the media, but then only claims the children from the family that he's married into is his, and sort of idealizes them and praises them, and basically devalues and degrades his own children with his own, uh, that he's the father of, with his former baby mom, who's also African American. Try to get that out there. Hopefully that made sense. Um, if you have a father that's abusive in other ways, so sexually abusive, financially abusive, verbally abusive, physically abusive, all of those, psychologically abusive also as well. That you have the narcissistic father wounds, especially if you've been exposed to that over the years. If you have a father that is a womanizer or a misogynist, you most likely have experienced the narcissistic father wound. I think there is, just working in the field of mental health for as many years as I have, working with as many people as I have, researching, writing, and just doing all different types of projects, television, court work, even. You I know the power of modeling, especially, within my own community. I identify as African American. I know the power of modeling behaviors. So, just a little bit about me, background. I did a research study with African American women who were psychologically abused while growing up years ago as part of my graduate school dissertation study. And if you're from my age, and I'm around 44, about to be 45. And then, my age group especially, and even now, even younger, and older, there's very few models of healthy, loving Black couples on televisions. And most people, especially around my age group, idealized and romanticized the Cosby family, because that was their one um, positive role model of what Black love should look like. And so a lot of people grew up wanting that, or seeking that fantasy of a relationship from what they saw on television. And so I think, the same. You're when you're growing up in your family, your parents, or whether you like it or not, they are your first role models of what love between a couple in a healthy romantic relationship or a healthy partnership should look like, between man and woman, or whomever your parents are, woman, woman, male, male. So I think they are your first representation and they are your first teachers of what healthy, loving relationships should look like. If you don't have parents, then your caregivers, you can insert caregivers here. Um, and so when you have parents and or caregivers that are womanizing, so they're basically showing you that, womanizing, and I don't know what is the other end of that spectrum when you have women that sort of hop around from man to man. But anyhow, you get the gist of what I'm saying. But for Father's Day, we'll stick to womanizer here. But if you have people, you have a father figure, or person in that father figure role that's basically showing you that women are, objects to be desired, to be lusted after, and to be hopped over, like hopped from woman to woman to woman to woman. That's not a healthy relationship with women, or to be used for sex, or to only have a sexual relationship with, and nothing more is superficial and is physically based. You may have that. Someone who has a poor perception of women, or who is a misogynist, does not like women, and, takes the opportunity to bash women every opportunity he gets. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, because their beliefs are rooted in women should be seen and not heard. Women should be used for what they provide, but I don't actually really like them as a person. I don't actually want to get to know them and have a real relationship with them. I only like them for what they can do for me. But again, they have no place in my home or no place in society outside of how it benefits me. Um, and then also too, and I get this one a lot. You know, especially, I've worked with women in domestic violence situations, and this is probably one of the top comments that I get from women in domestic violence situations. My husband or my spouse or my partner may be abusive towards me, but they're actually a great father. And I'm inclined to disagree, because I don't think a person is a great father if your children grow up experiencing or seeing that. I think that does a lot greater damage than folks realize, because to me, seeing domestic violence, that is a form of psychological abuse, which is often much more harmful than physical abuse. Although typically speaking, if someone is physically abusive, in my experience, are also psychologically abusive. Um, but I think if a person exposes their children to them providing poor treatment or being abusive towards their mother, they're not a great parent. And that, again, going back to that modeling, children sort of encode that in their brain as this is how you treat. This is how you treat your partner, or this is acceptable forms of treatment, or this is, even if logically they know that it's wrong, right? It's wrong to physically abuse a woman in this way. Psychologically, that doesn't necessarily stop the trauma from happening over and over and over again as they become an adult, because again, modeling has a strong and profound impact on the human brain. All right. So I gave you some examples. Again, it's not inclusive, but I think, anybody, a father that could be coercive, for example, convince their child to commit crimes or do things for their own personal gain. All of those things. There's so many dynamics of narcissistic fathers, of course. And so it's hard for me to kind of and capture all of them on this podcast episode, but hopefully you get the gist of what I'm trying to say. And so if you have a narcissistic father wound, there's more than likely you have dealt with rejection time and again. And I spoke about this a little bit earlier, but rejection is a prominent theme when you grow up in a narcissistic parent, or a household with a narcissistic parent, because Human beings are wired to for a connection. They are wired for attachment. And so when you get rejected over and over and over again, that does something to you, not just mentally, not just emotionally, but it can also do something for you, physically in terms of, just the goal driven and ambitious behavior that you may have for yourself, validation that you seek from others, right? Especially if you are a woman, but also too if you are a son. So rejection is you're never being chosen. And this, is interesting because rejection can occur in several different ways in the home of a narcissistic father. So for example, when we talk about narcissistic family dynamics, you can have the golden child, you can have the scapegoat, but with the golden child, they can absolutely do no wrong. And there's a lot of love and adoration to being the golden child. You oftentimes get the best version of the narcissistic parent because you're idealized, you're put up on a pedestal, you are given all the accolades, you are their sunshine. They see you as an extension of themselves or like the best version of that. And so they will give you a lot more of what they give the scapegoat or the lonely child or whomever else, everybody else in the family. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're being abused, that you're, excuse me, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not being abused. It just means that you're getting the best version of them. But the way that the abuse happens is that you're shown that, love can be conditional, right? Not everybody in the house gets conditional love, and you're oftentimes pitted against other siblings, right? Which creates um, that separation, that contention, that hostility, the argumentativeness, the competitiveness between you and your siblings because one is often prioritized over the other. And so everyone else can be left wondering, like, what did I do that's not good enough? Why am I not lovable? Why am I not good enough? Why do I never get approval? Why am I constantly being rejected? And I have to constantly compare myself to the golden child, whether that be girl or boy. But I have to constantly compare myself to see how I have to continue to try to mold myself or do these things to myself so that I can get a crumb or an ounce of love. Um, and so it doesn't matter what you do, it's like it's going to be. It's never going to be good enough, right? But rejection is, rejection and comparison are the thieves of joy. And so you live your life with this father thinking that, like, man, I never I'm not lovable and I don't know why. You may grow up thinking that he is capable of love because you see what appears on the outset to look like love and acceptance with the golden child. And it's always like this continuous mind scrutiny of the mind to wonder why, like, why can I never be loved? Why am I never good enough? And so you continue to see that rejection play out over and over and over again. That, if you do this, if you do things exactly how your sibling did it, if you accomplish something, it's going to be good enough. And the goalpost is always changing in a narcissistic relationship. So while you may get some glimmers of being praised or idealized momentarily, you will ultimately always end up back in devaluation. And so I say that to say that even if you're in a family where someone is getting treated well by that person, it is completely possible to say that you and your siblings don't necessarily have the same parents, right? And especially if there's like age gaps or, things like that, it is possible for you to have the same parents, but really not have the same parents. And, so just want to point that out there. I think going back to that, I think, again, if you have a narcissistic parent, A lot of times they will go out of their way and, intentionally make you feel unworthy, and it's that intentionality behind that making you feel unworthy is oftentimes what they grew up feeling or what they often feel about themselves, and so it's a projection of how they feel or the feelings that they resonate with, and so they feel like it's their job or, that's just how they're gonna show up for everyone else is to sort of project that onto to everyone else, that feeling of unworthiness, and that could be done through a multitude of different ways. It's completely ignoring you by not acknowledging you, betrayal. And there was this movie I was watching, which is rare because I don't really watch a whole lot of movies. But there's this movie that I was watching. So it's crazy. It's back in the 80s. But it was basically about although it's like a family, it was really about a father and his 2 sons. And the way that the movie starts out is like, it starts out, there's this waitress at a cafe, and there's like the youngest brother has a crush on the waitress at the cafe. It turns out that his older brother is actually dating the waitress at the cafe. And then somehow or another, it comes like they're moving or something. I forget how it goes, but the brother is like talking to what he perceives to be his girlfriend at the cafe. And then she like lets him know that basically she's been dating his father the whole time. And I don't mean to laugh, but this movie is just like, it's crazy. And so he gets mad, and so the basic overarching premise of the movie is because the father has, like, this competition game with his older son where it's like he's constantly even though he's married to their mother, he's constantly competing with his oldest son, and when it comes to the women and things like that, and they discover, like, the movie goes on and it, like, discovers all the secrets with, father and this waitress over the years and things like that. But then, the older brother and the younger brother grows up and that cycle continues where the younger brother finally has his girlfriend, he's in love and blah blah blah. And what does the older brother do? He like cuts him to the white meat and sleeps with that woman. And so the movie has way more twists and turns beyond that, but just to give you the premise of that, and it's just like that game of you know, like the ultimate betrayal and cutting you down, and making you feel like you're unworthy, like, damn, and they're all kind of wondering, about it, damn, do you really even love me? Like, what is really going on? And despite all this like betrayal going on, is really interesting to see because another element of the movie is despite like this untrustworthiness, this betrayal, the sons kind of get together to protect their father, right? So they do all this stuff to like go out and protect him and make sure their mother doesn't find out, not to hurt her and all this. I mean, and they put their lives in danger to do this. And so I thought this is wild, but it's actually a phenomenal movie because I think it portrays narcissism in a very eloquent way and how it shows up in the family and how there's all this competitiveness and made to feel devalued and all these secrets, right? These devastating secrets. But also, too, if you have the narcissistic father wound, probably one of the things you struggled with the most is safety and protection. I think a man's role in the family, a leader of the family, should provide and protect, build, provide, and protect for their family. And I think when you have this lack of protection around a father figure, so you have, and I'll give you some examples of what lack of protection looks like, because I've seen it over and over again. And even if your father doesn't display overt abusive behaviors, they can be covert in the lack of protection, and that oftentimes shows up. So, for example, if you have an overt narcissistic mother, you have a mother that's overly bearing, that is seriously abusive, puts your life in danger, and it's extremely chaotic. But you have a father that is, I don't know, they can't really do anything. They feel like they can't really do anything. They don't really offer any method to protect you. They don't really take the leadership role and say, you know what, you're harming the children. I'm going to prioritize the safety and well being of my children over being in a relationship. That's one aspect. I think when, you have fathers that may leave their children unattended or unsupervised, young children, unattended or unsupervised, or with people that they don't even know, questionable, um, people with a questionable character. So you may leave them in a home full of people that are maybe have a prison background, or you may leave them in a home full of people that are actively using and abusing drugs, those kinds of things like that, because or you just sort of walk away and you pawn your children, or you dump your children off on someone else, like a family member, and you just sort of go and you check out. So there's no safety, there's no protectiveness, there's no checking in to see how your children are doing. Or here's another popular one that I think is, a lot of people, especially women that I work with, don't recognize this, but another way that abusive behavior shows up is when you have fathers that align themselves or side with other abusers. So, for example, if you are a woman who is dating or married to an abuser, and the feedback that you get is to, from that father figure, is to, well, you need to do this or you need to do that. And basically, they're telling you all the things that you need to do in order to stay in that relationship or work it out with your abuser. They are essentially gaslighting and grooming you and pressuring you into staying into a relationship that's doing you more harm than good. So there's a sabotage to push you in the direction of a relationship that's abusive. There is tough turning a blind eye when you're in an abusive relationship. Like, I don't see it. It has nothing to do with me. Um, and I'm not here to show up for you in a way that's emotionally supportive, right? Or if you have a father that's, again, emotionally absent, right? And they don't look for to you for protection, but maybe they show up to you for providing and protecting when they need something from you. So they kind of have a history of showing up when they need or want something from you. And so you're immediately put into the role of being the parent, the provider, the protector, and all of that. So you have become the parentified child, essentially. And they want you to kind of be in this position where you're always rescuing and saving them, or you're providing for their needs, but you can never depend on them for anything. You can have a narcissistic father that does provide, so they may give you money, right? And that's all that they may give. So they throw money at the problem. And that's sort of their get out of jail free card. Like, they'll support you, but they're not going to really like teach you any values. They're not going to really show up for you in a way that's going to help you to emotionally regulate or depend on them, right? They may throw money at your problems, but there also may be strings attached, or this is also really common in a toxic family dynamic where someone may give you money, but may throw it back in your face when they've given you money when they're vulnerable, or they expect something for something, right? Without telling you that up front. Like, they may offer the role of being a helpful, generous person when you need them, but then they ask you to do something that pushes against your boundaries or pushes against your limits at a later time. And they're going to immediately bring up the fact that, hey, I helped you, so you need to help me. and so that could be an example of how there's strings attached, or when they throw money, or money can be used as another source of control and manipulation as a way to coerce you to do things. They can also coerce you to do things for money. Um, Again, when I did my research study way back when, one of the women that I interviewed, and to this day, I've worked in the criminal justice system a long time. One of the hardest things. And it's not really a disorder, but I feel like it should be. And I'm not really sure where it would be classified, but one of the hardest conditions or issues to treat with a person is fraud. So if you have people that are constantly stealing and doing financial scams, in my experience, this isn't always true, but I would say probably 8 to 9 times out of 10, most of the time when you're working with people who have and I'm not talking about like little stuff, I'm talking about like huge histories of fraud. In my experience, that's usually an intergenerational thing. So you usually come from a family of fraudsters. Um, and I hope that's a word, but people that commit fraud, I should say that. But you come from a family of people who commit fraud. It's not always the case, but most of the time it is. And so, one of the reasons why it's so hard to treat that and get people to stop. I mean, I've worked with people who have committed, like, have done major time for it, or they're waiting court and they continue to commit fraud even while they're waiting for a court. And it becomes like this vicious cycle, because the reason being is because of a lot of the times is it has to do with the element of coercive control. When you come from a family of people who commit fraud, a lot of times the way that you get that sort of love and acceptance from them is from doing something for them, that benefits them somehow. So basically, you give me money and I'll be kind to you. That's what you get, right? It's a very transactional relationship. And a lot of times children get pressured into this vicious cycle because they learn very quickly that if they don't produce for their family, for their parents, for their siblings, they get no amount of love, or they basically get thrown to the wolves. They get further abuse. They get the crap kicked out of them essentially, or they get expunged from the family and all kinds of, stuff. And I'm trying to put it in the most simplistic way that I can, but essentially, it's very intergenerational. And so they want to have some semblance of family. They want to have some semblance of a lifestyle. And so it becomes this vicious cycle, whereas they constantly have to give their parents material things in order to get any ounce of love and affection from them. Very vicious, very vicious and very cyclical. And a lot of times they see very quickly that once that it's almost like getting an Amazon package. Once that initial like, wow, thank you wears off, or that like instant gratification wears off, there's no love there anymore. And so it's like, in order to get more of that, you have to give more. So it's like give, get, give, get, give, get, that type of thing. So yeah, it's very difficult to treat that, because money and emotional validation are very closely tied, as well as that like intermittent reinforcement. And if you know anything about intermittent reinforcement, such as with gambling, like people who go and gamble, it's very hard to get unhooked from intermittent reinforcement. So with people who gamble, here's another thing, side note, just to kind of give you an idea of how the brain works. Like if you go gamble, most people lose a lot of money, but then you get that one win, that one big hit, and then maybe you might get two more hits after that. And then it's like, oh my gosh, now I've won. And so now I'm like, oh, all these coins are coming out, or I've won like $1,000, or I've won all this money. And so now I have to continue to re-engage in the machine to try to or whatever game to try and win more money. So that's kind of how intermittent reinforcement works, and it works that way with the abuse as well. And one of the other things that I would say about narcissistic fathers that I think, um, one that you need to pay attention to is if you've had one, a lot of times they are very hypersexual or sexualized. And this, even if they're misogynistic, so they may even feel very comfortable referencing your body shaming you, or just being hyper focused on image, and what, they may talk down about. Um, you know, they may talk down about a particular look, a particular aesthetic, or a particular race, and then go after that. And I'll give you an example of that. Um, uh And then maybe this might get me but one of the things that I've noticed, again, I've worked a lot in the forensic field, and I've worked in a lot of male-based careers. And one of the things that I've always noticed, and this, it just remains truth, like you have, you know, and I'll describe it in this way. If you've worked in a place, for me, and I've worked in a few places that are like this, that have this good old boy mentality, and what that means is you have these predominantly white men that come with like all of these misogynistic views, like a woman should know their place, and they may be very racist, and they're going to make these comments that show their racism. But, at the end of the day, and this is their whole identity. They're super macho, they are super racist, or they may show up and have like the Confederate flag and all this kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, the woman that they are sexualizing or fetishizing or want to kind of secretly try and be with is the opposite of um what they're saying. Like, so if they're saying that I don't like black women, a lot of times what they'll do at work is they'll show up and they'll secretly try to engage in black women. Like, they don't want anybody to know that. But they're flirting, they're trying to have some sort of relationship, and I don't care if they're married, especially if they're married. Actually, I should say that, especially if they're married. A lot of times I've noticed that in male-dominated careers, in the spaces that I've worked in, that especially if they're married, they will show up at work, or wherever else, whatever else, and they'll have, it's almost like a secret identity where they're kind of pursuing, or they're flirting, and they're sort of going after the complete opposite of what they say that they desire, for image purposes. So that's usually a red flag. But what's interesting about these men that are hypersexual, that are super misogynistic, that may be racist or whatever, is that they have the most support by women. So women that are very male centered, that will, put a man over everything else, um, support these men the most. And so they definitely have mastered the art of supporting an ego that is very toxic in these spaces. And a lot of times, this is what goes on at home when you have a narcissistic father. You have egregious behavior that is supported by the other parent, or the other parent may be sort of witnessing and not really intervening, in putting your welfare first. So that's the other thing that I will notice. You have a father that may lead a smear campaign. So smear campaign is where they sort of trash talk you to their friends, to other family members, and they're basically painting you out to have this person with a poor reputation, amongst everyone else. There's a lot of gossip, putting you down, putting your business out, for everyone to sort of scrutinize and talk trash about. So that smear campaign. Um, And lastly, you know, what I will say is you have a narcissistic father wound. Um, that father is not interested in getting to know you. You're not the first thought on their mind, while you oftentimes prioritize them. You're always kind of thinking of your parents and, maybe engaging in censorship, maybe bending over backwards for their love and approval. They are not doing the same things for you. In fact, a lot of times what they give you is very empty. So they may say things to you, the whole bait and switch thing. They may say things to you that would implicate that they love and care about you. But actually, there's really no action behind the things that they say, or they actually do the opposite of what they say. And um, that's very much, a lot of people get brainwashed and gaslit by stuff like that when, a person says something. So they may say, I love you, but then turn around and do things that are not very loving towards you, right? Or they may say that they care for you and they want to be there for you and all this kind of stuff. But when you actually need them, they're never there. Or, another thing with inconsistent and absentee fathers, they may say, I'll be there for you. I will come and pick you up. And they promise to spend time with you and never show. And that leads to you, being hopeful, but then your hopes are being quickly dashed, which leads to, in later adult years, which leads to you hanging hope on potential. A lot of people wonder why, they sort of hang their hat on potential or wish for potential in relationships. That is oftentimes a repeat of what they did in childhood with their own fathers. Um, and so, if you have a narcissistic father wound, first of all, let me be the first to tell you I am sorry. It is not you. And I'm sorry that you have to experience this, but be sure to take care of yourself. And part of taking care of yourself is to recognize that you have a father wound that stems from a narcissistic father. Of course, I'm always an advocate of therapy, and I think therapy here is especially helpful because, first of all, you need to look at the wound. You need a safe place to actually explore that wound with someone who could sort of offer that objectivity, that insight to you, but also help you look at how you show up in the world and in relationships as a result of the father wound. And these could be things that you're not even aware of. So, for example, if you have one of the things that I've noticed with people as a therapist and, working with folks over the years, therapy, coaching, and so forth, when you've been continuously rejected or you've been continuously dismissed or like just your concerns are minimized or just cast out, you become invisible. Like you have learned or you've been conditioned to not rock the boat and that your voice doesn't matter. And so you may continue to express that and that manifests in different ways throughout your adult life, right? So I think that that's an example of how therapy can help you to, one, show up for yourself and show up in the world too. Look at your relationship, how you show up in the world with other men, what your beliefs are around men. Do you like men? Are you afraid of men? And even if you're another man, there are so many men that I know of, just about all the men that I know of that I worked with in prison were deathly afraid of other men. And I know that sounds crazy to say, but all the men that I've worked with, they were afraid of or very easily intimidated by men. And this wasn't just relative to the prison environment. This is a lot of times what led them to be in the prison environment. They never had mentors, they never had role models. And I won't say that's the case for all of them, but the large majority of them are. And women can also show up in this way where you are afraid of or intimidated by men, and you show up with men and women very differently based on, your perceptions around men, which could have been formed by that relationship with a narcissistic father. Self-help books are also great. But one thing you need to recognize about self-help books is they're broad strokes. You also have to be in a place where you can receive the information that a self-help book is giving you. It may not apply to your situation currently, or it may apply to your situation later, or you might have some special circumstances going on there. So recognize that those are general and broad strokes. I also too don't. I recommend self-help books is not being like um, I recommend self-help books as being the addition to, not the final destination. So I think that you should do self-help books with the support of a therapist, journaling, and all that kind of good stuff in order for it to be much more effective. Not like, oh, I'm going to read this book. This is going to cure all my problems, and I'm going to stop here. And I feel like I, responsibly, ethically have to say that because contrary to popular belief, there are people that feel like I can read a book and then, that stops. I think podcasts are also very helpful. Um, other material that, blogs and things like that can be very helpful. I would say also to be very selective about what you pick. You want to pick it from someone ideally who's licensed, who is trained, and who has expertise in this area, because very similar to, like, just social media in general, or just information in general, it is possible to be informationally fat, meaning that you get all this information from all these different sources. Everybody is saying something different, right? But you're not sure who to pick from. And so you end up getting overwhelmed and just like, you're not really sure what's applicable to you. And oftentimes too, people just say stuff. There are a lot of people that may watch content and then suddenly become a guru, and then they're just like saying stuff, but clinically they don't have that expertise, or they just don't know because they've never experienced it. They don't know the work. And again, I feel confident in saying certain things because of my years of experience. So I didn't just roll out of bed saying, I'm a narcissistic abuse expert. And I feel like that is a very trendy trend right now. And so I think you want to be careful about whose information that you consume, and don't consume too much of it, right? Because you're going to get overwhelmed and it's going to be so much coming at you from a different direction. I think it's good to, have, again, I'll say this again, supportive male role models, or work on finding that positive role models, or finding positive mentors that embody what you would like to see in a father figure, what works for you. And so I don't think that that's emphasized enough. Is, and you could start with like social media or reading a book or something, and like see characteristics that you like in other like male figures, and see if you can, sort of maybe write that down and have that materialize in a real male figure. And you can find male role models in different things, so they don't, you can have more than one. So you can have one that maybe like teaches you about finances, or educates you about finances, educates you about dating, or someone who maybe mentors you around how to care for your home and things like that. And so I think it's always useful to have that. I've had lots of male role models over the years, and they've always been extremely helpful, because they do offer a fresh perspective in my career, just in different elements of my life. I've had a lot of different positive male role models, and I think it's good to have that. And as you grow, your male role model should grow as well. So you may find that you need different people for different things. So I hope that this has been helpful. I'm going to leave this here. And I'm curious to know what you guys think about this. Of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, love to continue the conversation down in the comments. And again, I wish you all the best in terms of Father's Day. I know that it can be extremely triggering, so make sure that you take care of yourselves. And until next time, guys, be well.